The question I'm going to answer today that's been presented to me is Suboxone for heroin. Does it help heroin addiction? How so? I've kind of addressed a lot of issues about Suboxone in my earlier videos. If you go down into the video section, some of our earlier videos talk a lot about Suboxone, but this question sort of keeps coming up, and maybe I can give it a little different angle on it, but you can also see some of those videos. And I'll put some new twists on it that others aren't necessarily talking about. Suboxone is a wonderful, wonderful medication. The actual generic name is buprenorphine. Suboxone has buprenorphine and naloxone. I won't get into that. I talk about it else places, but it's important to know that it's very misunderstood what the naloxone and that Suboxone strip does. I can discuss it again at a later time. But this medication is a fantastic replacement medication for heroin and and heroin addiction. Does it help heroin addiction? Yes, it does. But let's talk about why does it help heroin addiction. Heroin is what's called semi-synthetic, which means there's some natural components to it and some that are just purely made in a laboratory. Semi-synthetic versus pure. It's an agonist, opiate agonist, opiate receptor agonist. The opiate receptors, there's 3 different kinds and 3 or 4 different kinds, and within those there are subtypes, and the main one we'll be addressing is the mu receptor here, although the other ones are just as important, but we will be addressing the mu receptor. And what it does is it goes on your receptor, and over time you do develop a tolerance. And what an addiction is that it would be simply put is it's this: you need increasing doses to have the same effect, and at some point you may not even have that same effect. You can overdose on this medication. In addition, a lot of it because of the lifestyle and the fact that it is illegal, which really creates an argument for harm reduction and decriminalization of drugs like heroin. But because of the fact that it's illegal and the fact that you turn all of your psychological and social machinery to obtaining this drug, and at some point it's no longer getting a high or an enjoyable, pleasurable euphoria, as it's often called, it's just to stave off getting sick. What does Suboxone do? Slightly different mechanism. It is legal, so you can obtain it legally through a doctor that writes a prescription. It is fully synthetic, so it's completely made in the laboratory, just like something like methadone, Demerol, fentanyl, dilaudid. It is fully synthetic, and unlike heroin, which is a full agonist, it turns on the mu receptors. This is a partial agonist. It partially turns on the receptor. Furthermore, just like something like methadone, it's long acting, so you don't need frequent dosing like you would with heroin. Because of the property that it's a partial agonist, partially turns on the receptor, and it's long acting, it makes it so you do not have the euphoria. And I know some people will make comments about this, but you don't in general, for the most part, for most people, and after a few uses, you don't have the euphoria. You don't have to dose every hour or 2 hours or 3 hours. And it's also, because it's long acting, you do not need an escalating dose over time because it has what's called a ceiling effect, and it stays at the same dose over X amount of time. And you can't really overdose on it. You can potentially overdose on it. So I say that with a little bit of caution here, but it has a ceiling effect in theory. So after a certain amount in your body, it sort of saturates all of the receptors. So all in all, what we have is this replacement medication that takes care of your withdrawals, takes care of your cravings, and now it allows your kind of brain, the frontal cortex and the midbrain, which are involved in all of this, to heal, to reconnect, to redo their architecture and get back to where it was to be normal. the main things and a lot of the mistakes that I see with this medication are a few. One, it's not for short-term use. There's no literature that points to the fact that you can use it to detox off heroin over several days and then get off of this medication, okay? So the data does not support that. The clinical observation does not support that. Yet this is commonly done in detox programs across the United States, especially here in Orange County. This is not what it's for. And the underlying thought in that is that, well, I'm going to use this medication to get them off because you're trading one addiction for another. You're not. And I just described why one of these things, heroin, is an addiction and Suboxone is not. You don't spend your entire psychosocial machinery obtaining this drug and eventually lose everything for this drug, okay? That's one of the definitions of addiction. So maybe that is one of the underlying sort of threads of thought that people approach this, that they need to get on this medication and get off of it as quickly as possible. Because all you're doing really is, at that point, you're replacing one for the other, and then they eventually go back to the first one. And in fact, when they are on Suboxone, they have a higher risk of death and overdose because they relapse and take a lot more heroin than they should. Two, yes, withdrawals are very difficult if done inappropriately. So if the frequency of use and the time that you get somebody off of Suboxone is the wrong way, it's going to be a difficult withdrawal. This is something most people don't understand, and when they criticize this medication, they never give me any information about how long were they using, what they were using it for, how long was their previous use. In managing these medications, the details are really important, and the devil is in the details. Unless if you have someone that truly understands that, you're going to have a hard time doing this kind of taper or getting yourself on it. It's going to have negative consequences. Maybe not as bad as using heroin on the street, but it can have very negative consequences and potentially leading back to the kind of use on the street. Number three, how long does somebody need to be on Suboxone? Well, we don't have any clinical data to tell us why, and that's okay. You know, it really is okay. I do have clinical data that tells me if I get you on Suboxone, it's going to save your life, and I maintain it. And maybe we have that data up to 5 years. Good data. We have data that goes longer. But when a heroin addict comes up to me or sits in front of me and they've lost everything in and out of jail, they're homeless, they got track marks everywhere, they have hepatitis C, and they're for the first time thinking about getting on Suboxone, and they're so adamant about pointing out to me, how long do I have to be on it and I want to get off of it? I'm really quick to point out, this is not how this medication is used, and how's it been working for you so far? You've some of them are new, some of them may have tried this before, quick detox taper. Get on this medication, you're not an addict, get your life back and move forward. So this is some of the issues surrounding this medication. And I saw a comment on YouTube, I was quite surprised. There's been some data that this stuff is being used for medication-resistant depression, and it works. And I observe this clinically all the time, and it makes complete sense. And in some secondary and tertiary way, I am using it on my population to treat depression. And here's what happens. There's a certain segment of the population that might have low baseline dopamine for whatever reasons, we'll call it genetic, but inherently low baseline dopamine. There's a lot of depression, and maybe they went into substance abuse because of a lot of these sort of, I like to call them existential issues. And that's what the dope did for them. And now they're back on Suboxone and life is going great. The minute they start to taper off, their mood changes extensively, and they have a really hard time in that post-acute withdrawal time, or even early on, sleep disturbances, anxiety, and severe depression. And the thing is, it's not the Suboxone that's causing that. This was a intrinsic clinical issue that you had, and Suboxone happened to address it because before you went down the road of opiates to address this issue, you weren't aware of why you were addressing this issue. And here is a powerful medication that's really taking care of the clinical issues of the opiates and also taking care of the underlying issue. You're killing 2 or 3 birds with one stone. That's a very powerful medication, and it's okay. We need to change the paradigm in this country of the way all of this is looked at, and we need to really, really unleash the power of this medication, if I could say that, so that it's accepted and everyone changes their view on it. Keep in mind, when in the US a couple of years ago, we had over 72,000 deaths. And for the first time from the age of 18 to 38, we surpassed the number of car crash deaths in this country in our young by heroin overdoses. A place like Portugal in 2016 had 1 death. And in the early 90s, they had just as many deaths as we do, and the jail's full when they decided to go to medication-assisted treatment and social services, prevention, treatment, education. But mainly the cornerstone of the care was methadone and psychosocial services. And in 2016, and nowadays they do use a lot more subs, they had 1 death. And here we are inhibited by unleashing the power of this medication, and our paradigm, our view, our social constructs kind of seep into the addict's view as well, and what their perception is of acceptance from their 12-step community, their family, their friends, and themselves, and they're resistant to getting on this medication. On the other side, you see the same institutional and professional bias from providers, and that doesn't help either. I hear all kinds of interesting things from providers that should know better. From a harm reduction professional perspective, a healthcare provider should be non-judgmental, look at the evidence and the data, and give that information, including emotional and psychological support to the patient so they can transfer onto this medication, be maintained on this medication, judgment-free, and empowering them to make their own choices. I just wanted to add some of that stuff about the use of Suboxone. If you do want to know more about Suboxone, I have a lot of content. You could start with this video up to my left. In addition, please go ahead and subscribe to our channel and ring the bell down here. This will enable us to bring you more contents and grow us as a community so we can fight addiction. Thank you.